Hello and greetings, everyone. My name is Rachel Dratch. I am delighted and thrilled and honored to welcome you all to the Honor Museum's monthly webinar for educators from all over the world. I am especially delighted to invite my friend Keith Kahn-Harris to present. Keith is, I don't even know which hat to describe. Keith has done everything from write about heavy metal and Jews to candy. What are those little candy things with the instructions?
The surprise eggs.
Yes, the surprise eggs. Anyway, Keith is one of my most interesting and thought-provoking and curious and open and wonderful people to talk to and learn from. And I'm just delighted that you all get to be exposed to him. I want to take a moment before Keith speaks to just give people a chance to just say where they're from. Um, so, Mark, where are you from?
I'm from rural mid Wales. You
Oh,
probably don't hear that very often.
no, not today, but this is so fantastic. Thank
The
you for
little
joining
town
us.
of Montgomery in rural mid Wales.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm delighted you're here. And
Pleased
Neves,
to be
tell
here.
us where you're from.
Hello to everybody. My name is Nives from Croatia.
Wonderful. I see Sharon is here from Tel Aviv, and I am here from Jerusalem. And Keith is, well, he's from the United Kingdom, but he's in Germany right now. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the mic over to Keith. You're going to have a great time tonight, everybody. Viewers at home, you're missing out by not being here live, but this is fantastic. Okay, you're on.
Well, thanks for such a nice introduction, Rachel.
You're
It's a
welcome.
pleasure to be doing this. It's also slightly ironic because I'm going to be talking about Jews and normality, um, which seems an odd thing to talk about, given that one of us, Rachel, is in a country where she might at any moment have to go down to a bomb shelter. Doesn't seem very normal to me. And I'm in a hotel room in Berlin because I've been invited to speak at a conference on online anti-Semitism tomorrow, although it's a face-to-face conference. And Germany, Berlin, anti-Semitism, all big stuff. But nonetheless, here I am. I'm going to talk about Jews, normality, everydayness. If I can, sorry, I just need to, hopefully I can, there you go. So is the situation normal? And what does normal mean anyway? Well, it would be very odd to call today's situation with the Jewish people normal. We are headline news in all sorts of ways, but mostly we are currently involved in a war, and we're currently experiencing heightened concerns about anti-Semitism. And all of this stuff is, whilst not unprecedented in Jewish history, still it doesn't feel like everyday life. But what does normal mean anyway? The fact is, though, at the same time as all this big stuff is going on, there's a lot of stuff that you could call normal. I just picked out, this is from the synagogue I'm a member of, New London Synagogue, which is in London. And this is just stuff I got off their website about what's coming up. We've got a Hebrew reading crash course, a communal Seder, and the New London Academy, which is for teaching young people. This is normal stuff. This happens every year, most year, and it's still going on. In fact, Rachel, I'm sure she didn't even think of canceling this call. We're still doing it. And this is a normal thing to do, is to get Jewish educators from around the world together on Zoom to talk together, to learn from each other. This is what Jews have been doing for years, and even doing it on Zoom is a fairly normal thing. No one bats an eyelid that we've got on this call somebody from, 3 continents? And that I'm doing this from a hotel room. The thing is, though, have we ever actually been normal? As I say, what does normal actually mean anyway? And there are a lot of reasons to think that however much the times we are in at the moment do seem exceptional in all sorts of ways, you could say 'twas ever thus. I mean, after all, anti-Semites have never found Jews normal, almost by definition. We are something that is outside the norm. We are something that is threatening, that is malignant, whether it is the figure of modern anti-Semitic imagination, the sort of bloated Jewish plutocrat who is simultaneously a Bolshevik, a Zionist, and a capitalist, or whether it's in the past that we were literally devilish people who were killing Christian children in strange rituals. We were not normal. We were marked out as different, as special, and not necessarily in a good way. In fact, not in a good way at all. But that's, of course, I don't think anyone would dispute that. But I think there's also a Jewish tradition of seeing ourselves as not normal in a good way. We are a people in the modern era where we've had the possibility to stand out. We have done so. Whether you like or dislike Benjamin Netanyahu, there is no doubting the fact that he is an exceptional figure, that he is a figure from a small country who is making a mark on a global stage. As I say, you may like him, you may hate him, but there is no doubt that this isn't a dour, dull bureaucrat. Artistically, we are not a normal people either. We have figures of the stature of Leonard Cohen, of, well, Barbara Streisand maybe, and of course Albert Einstein, and I can name many, many more. And these are things that make us identifiable today, for good or for ill, to the non-Jewish world, and that the Jewish world itself celebrates. We are constantly talking about our geniuses, our brilliant people, are people who have made their mark way beyond the confines of the Jewish community in a way that people several centuries ago, Jews were incapable of doing because they weren't allowed to do so. One trope that you find a lot in a certain kind of Jewish discourse is the outsized proportion of Jewish Nobel Prize winners, both in Israel and in many other countries too. And that is something that many Jews celebrate, that we are not a normal people, we are an exceptional people. We are exceptionally brilliant. We have made our mark. We have made full use of the opportunities that emancipation in the modern world creates. And some non-Jews are also in awe of this sort of stuff, just as much as it might lead to anti-Semitism. In some cases, it also leads to philo-Semitism, that we are a people who are exceptional. But ultimately, this pressure to be different, to not be normal, can be a double-edged sword. It can lead to anxiety and it can lead to pressure. And we respond as Jews in a variety of ways to this. We often become educators. We see ourselves every day. Regular Jews often are put into the position, whether they want to be or not, of being educators, essentially, not professional educators, but educators in the sense that we have a responsibility to tell the world about who we are and to almost be ambassadors. Sometimes we deal with the pressure by going public. Certainly, Jews in the last few decades, whether it's in Britain or in America or, of course, in Israel, are not people who stay quiet, regardless of what our politics are, and our politics could often be radically different from each other. We talk about it in public. Often a lot of political rows, whether they're about Israel or anything else, are often about one set of Jews contending with another set of Jews. We fight our corner, however we define that corner. We deal with this pressure by also by cultivating a public image sometimes. Sometimes we do the opposite to fighting against other Jews. We play down our internal differences and problems. We try and make ourselves bigger, a more intimidating target to those who hate us. And we often lean into our significance and our impact on the world, whether we are Jews from all sorts of different perspectives. It is very common, certainly outside the Haredi world, where it works a little differently, in talking about our role in changing the world, whether that is in using concepts like tikkun olam or in different sorts of ways, that our job as Jews is to make our mark, to be significant, and to change the world. And I'm not saying any of this stuff is always bad, but it does create a tremendous amount of pressure on ourselves that we need to think about, that we need to question sometimes. There was an article that struck me that came out a couple of years ago in the Jewish News, which is a British Jewish newspaper. And that was a few months after October the 7th, and a Jewish writer called Michelle Rosenberg went on a solidarity trip to Israel and talked about how, you can see the headline, "My visit to Israel made me see how British Jews have normalized making themselves smaller." Actually, I don't think she was right about that. I think the British Jews' public presence is far greater than it ever was before. And we are very much in the public sphere and very much normalizing making ourselves bigger. But nonetheless, I can understand how she might have felt that the condition of being in a relatively small minority in Britain is very different to the nature of Jewish life in Israel. The issue is that we need to question whether big Judaism is necessarily always something to aspire to, and whether smallness is necessarily always a problem. I'm not saying necessarily that this journalist was wrong. I'm not saying that bigness is necessarily wrong. But again, this is something that I think we need to at least think about. You see this a lot in a certain kind of anti-Semitism discourse. Jonathan Sachs said in a speech to European Parliament, "The hate that begins with Jews never ends with."
Keith, we just lost you for a second. Can you say that last sentence again? He said, "The hate
that begins with the Jews never ends with the Jews. We make a great mistake if we think anti-Semitism is a threat only to Jews. It is a threat first and foremost to Europe and to the freedoms it took centuries to achieve." And this kind of language made it into the European Union's 10-year strategy on anti-Semitism and Jewish life. And said very similarly, anti-Semitism is incompatible with Europe's core values. It represents a threat not only to Jewish communities and to Jewish life, but to an open and diverse society, to democracy and the European way of life. The European Union is determined to put an end to it. Now, I'm not saying any of this stuff is a bad thing, although I would say that Sachs's argument that hate beginning with Jews and spreading to others doesn't always align with historical reality in certain cases. But what I think I want to raise here is the question of what would be wrong if anti-Semitism was only a threat to Jews? What would with it if this was our struggle, a struggle of a small people to be free, to live free lives against hate? Why is it that our struggle necessarily has
Steve, I'm sorry. I think we lost your volume again. One more.
I can think of sorry about that.
We lost you at why is it that our struggle necessarily has?
Why is it that our struggle is necessarily a bigger struggle? Why can't our struggle be a struggle for a small people to live free lives free from hate? And I'm sure we can think of a lot of reasons why our struggle should be a bigger struggle. But I do have concerns about the ways in which, if you like, expanding or blowing up our Jewish struggles into global struggles, about the toll it can take on a certain kind of Jewish life, that it's not necessarily always a complete good. One thing I've noticed in recent years in the British Jewish community and others is a kind of inflation of discourse to the point where even relatively modest things can be treated as events of world historical proportions. So if you're not in the UK, you probably don't know that historically the British Jewish community was the only one that had two reform movements, one called Reform Judaism, the other called Liberal Judaism. A couple of years ago, the movements announced their intention to merge, which I certainly approved of, and I think many of us did. It was widely welcomed. The issue that I'm drawing attention to here is this is a leaflet, a flyer that was produced updating members of Reform and Liberal communities about the progress of this merger. And the chair of the merger committee said, as you can see here, the coming together of the movement for Reform Judaism and Liberal Judaism into one single movement is the most significant development in British Judaism of the last 80 years. Now, this was by any kind of historical measure a totally absurd thing to say. Two small movements coming together to make a medium-sized movement may well be very significant, but it hasn't. But when that was written, it hadn't actually happened yet. And this kind of inflated discourse worries me. Why does something have to be of world historical or even just British significance? Why is it that we cannot be comfortable with doing things for small reasons, or simply for it was much more efficient to merge two small movements to use resources more effectively? Why does it have to be something more? This is an example of this sort of Judaism that I've been talking about. And I suppose part of my objection is that such strategies of creating big Judaisms and significant Judaisms hide our normality and the existence of what I would call everyday Jewishness, the stuff of Jewish life as it is lived by Jews who don't necessarily live big lives. In fact, most of us do not live big lives. And one area where I really see this hiding of everyday life having effects that may not be very positive is in the festival of Hanukkah.
Lost you again. 1 second. Festival of Hanukkah.
Now, the festival of Hanukkah is one of the very few festivals that can be shared with the wider world. It doesn't involve a very extensive and taxing liturgy. It doesn't have issues about filming and cameras and recording and that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure if Chabad were the first people to do it, but they certainly were pioneers in this regard. And certainly in Britain, and I know in many countries, including the US, Hanukkah has often been the occasion for public Hanukkah lighting ceremonies where the great and the good will come together with Jews to light candles and talk about how Hanukkah is the festival of lights. Now, these are not bad things. Here are a couple of pictures of that. One is the Mayor of London at a Hanukkah lighting ceremony in Trafalgar Square. The other one is quite an old picture, is David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, watching Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis lighting a candle. Next to Cameron is the Israeli Tzipi Hotovely, who was then the Israeli ambassador. The problem is that Hanukkah is being changed in the process. Hanukkah is actually a highly particularist festival. It really goes along with Purim in that regard. Hanukkah is a festival about us and about our stubbornness and about our smallness and about our refusal to change in good ways and bad ways. But you'd be forgiven if you weren't Jewish of thinking that Hanukkah was this message, was this sort of vague festival of sort of universal light that happens sort of conveniently close to Christmas. We become so universal that Hanukkah stops being ours. It becomes everyone's. And in the process, it becomes kind of distorted in some quite odd ways. But this
I'm sorry, Keith, we lost you again at this slide.
Sorry, this is part of a wider problem of what I call downplaying doing, of when Jews speak about what it is to be Jewish, what it is to feel Jewish, rather than what it is to do Jewish. So if I had more bandwidth and more time, I would show you a clip from this British sitcom called Friday Night Dinner, which, if you haven't seen, is extremely funny. It's in a sort of typical North London non-Orthodox Jewish family who are culturally very Jewish. And there are two grown-up children who come home every Friday night to their parents for dinner. And all sorts of funny things happen. It gets some things note perfect. It's written by a Jewish writer called Robert Popper. Not all of the cast, but some of them are certainly Jewish. And it gets the sort of behaviors and attitudes of British Jewry perfect. It really does. Except you never see candles being lit. They never refer to the Shabbat. They don't even refer to the Sabbath. You see challah, but you don't see it being cut. You see wine, but you don't see a bracha. And whilst you might argue that these aren't the things that all Jewish families do, it would be quite odd to go to the trouble of getting challah every week and making a fancy meal without at least making a token reference to Shabbat. But the clip that I would have shown would have been one about an entire episode that's based around the death of the boy's uncle. And the boys are asked to be pallbearers. And the joke is that the uncle was extremely fat and they're really worried about having to carry his coffin. Now, one thing that Robert Popper, the writer, would have known is that pallbearers are not a thing in British Jewry. It never happens. We never carry the coffin to the mourners do not carry the coffin to the graveyard. I know it happens in some Jewish communities.
Keith, you know what happens in some Jewish communities,
Never happened. It doesn't happen in Britain. It never happens in Britain. In a Jewish funeral, that doesn't happen. And so you might argue what the problem, because it was actually a very, very funny episode. But I think it's telling that the sort of area where the writer felt, okay, we don't have to be strictly accurate here, is about stuff that Jews do. That the accuracy is in how Jews hold their bodies, what they say, that kind of thing, rather than doing. And I think this is a problem. I think this is distorting the way that non-Jews see Jewish life. There's an alternative current to Jewish bigness. I'm not going to read the entire quote, but if some people will know that the person there in the picture is Yeshayahu Leibovitz, famously curmudgeonly Jewish theologian and philosopher and thinker. And one of the things, his basic argument is a very austere kind of Judaism. A meaning, in fact, that his argument was that the highest religious duty was simply to do because we are commanded. Now, not everybody who isn't an Orthodox Jew would, in those sense. There's something about that kind of philosophy that I quite like. something about the absoluteness of being commanded without necessarily seeing enormous significance in what we do, without even being able to understand the significance of what we do, that I think provides quite a nice and quite useful corrective to the sort of big Judaism that we're talking about. We're Jews because we do. Why does there necessarily need to be much more? Or perhaps there is much more, but it is such a high metaphysical level that it is not it is not imminent in our lives. So there is, I think, an antidote to this kind of highly significant big Judaism. I used to joke for years, so this is a bit of a mea culpa, that we did need to be significant. I used to say if we didn't work on ourselves to make the world a better place, if Judaism wasn't making a difference, then we may as well just be ethno-religious group 27B. We may just be another little minority. In fact, we may
what? I'm sorry, we may just be another
just
minority.
like Bulgarian Orthodoxy. We may as well just be like Bulgarian Orthodox Christianity. Now, Bulgarian Orthodox Christianity is probably fairly significant in Bulgaria and perhaps in its diaspora, but it is just another group. And I used to say that was not what we would want. And now I think, I have to say, increasingly, I'm starting to think that the Bulgarian Orthodox Christianity model is starting to look a little bit tempting. It would actually be a tremendous relief in many ways if we could just be ethno-religious group 27B. So my own views on this stuff have changed, I think, quite radically. And in my book that I'm going to plug at the end, I go even further and say, what would be wrong with Judaism being a hobby, like being a train spotter? That's a picture of train spotters in America, but you have them in a lot of other countries. Actually, a hobby is not a thing to be denigrated. A hobby is often something that gives meaning and purpose to people's lives. But the thing is that train spotters or people like that aren't necessarily saying that their hobby has to affect anything beyond itself. That the point of being a stamp collector is not to change the world.
The point of being a stamp collector is not to change the world.
It's to create meaning and purpose in people's lives and create a nice community. Do we really need to be more than that? Well, this slide's a bit of a joke that probably doesn't mean anything outside the UK. But in my book, one of the things I say is, what if the purpose of Jewish life were actually, what if we got it the wrong way round? That the things we see as ephemeral to Jewish life were actually their purpose. And there's a great tradition in the British Jewish community of supper quizzes, which when I've talked about this at talks to American and other audiences, they just get blank looks. It's apparently a British thing. And most synagogues have them, or at least ones of a certain size. And it will be a quiz night. And you get into teams and you eat fish and chips or falafel and you have a nice time. What if that was the actual purpose of synagogues? And if it is the purpose of synagogues, do we have the courage to actually share that with the non-Jewish world? There is so much of Jewish life that is actually quite dull, that is actually quite boring. But it's often those things that people paradoxically find very attractive. So this slide shows an Instagram image for Limud, which is a very vibrant Jewish educational conference in Britain with an enormous volunteer community. And it really struck me, this was a slide they were recruiting for volunteers, as they have to do for every year. And how did they make being a recruitment of volunteers into an exciting thing? They created a flow chart. And it feels
it feels like what?
Flow chart. There's something about that that feels fundamentally Jewish. The idea that we would try to tempt and excite people into an activity by a flowchart diagram, that that our lives can be richer for being part of an organization, which often involves a lot of onerous work. I've often done I won't do it here, but I've often done in my talks, I've often asked people to put their hands up to say, if it's a Jewish audience, how many of you have been a trustee or served on a committee? And usually most of the audience's hands go up. In Britain, there is one Jewish charity for every 300 Jews. That's a lot of meetings. That's a lot of trust deeds. That's a lot of bureaucracy. And that is quite central to Jewish life. And it is, yes, quite boring. But I go even further than that in my book. And I talk about exulting in mediocrity. Now, I don't think mediocrity is actually a pejorative term. And here we come to another mea culpa. For many, many years, I had a loathing for a particular kind of Jewish music. You know, that's a picture of the Maccabees, who are an American group of, well, they're not so young, but they were young men who do these covers of popular songs with Jewish lyrics and create videos around them that are shared on Facebook on Hanukkah. Now, I think they're awful. And my argument against people like the Maccabees were, what are we saying to each other and to the world if we say that this is the best we can do? That this sort of stuff that is a pale copy of the original, this is what Jewish culture is, this is what Jewish music is. I've changed my opinion now. And seriously, I have. And actually, I have affection for the Maccabees and their ilk precisely because they're mediocre. And one of the things that led me to this realization was that I remember going to all sorts of school concerts when my kids were little. And in objective terms, they were artistically dreadful. But of course, to view it like that would be absolutely ridiculous because it was a school concert and it wasn't supposed to be anything else. In fact, mediocrity is a kind of achievement. It's an achievement of basic competence. And the art that is most communally embedded is almost always mediocre art. In that respect, I see the Maccabees as a much more fundamentally Jewish set of artists than Leonard Cohen is. Leonard Cohen is exceptional. Leonard Cohen is not, well, he's dead, was not communally embedded. He was not mediocre. He was a person outside that kind of Jewishness. And so I think we've got it the wrong way around. And you see this with a lot of beloved Jewish rituals. It's an extraordinary thing that Jews welcome in the Sabbath by blessing terrible, terrible wine. In America, it's Manischewitz. In Britain, it's Polwyn, which stands for, this was in the 1920s, or created Palestine Wine Company. And it comes in 3 variants, all of which are numbered. I cannot remember the numbers. One of them is number 4. And the legend goes that they're the numbers of the buses that went outside the Polwyn offices. And this is awful sweet red wine. Although my son tried Coptic communion wine in Egypt, and he assures me that that's even worse. So I don't know. But the point is, Jews have a lot of affection for Polwyn. Just like in America, a lot of Jews have affection for Manischewitz. And in Israel, there's Kedem. And I think it makes sense, actually, that we don't welcome in the Sabbath over good wine. We welcome in the Sabbath over wine that is Jewishly rooted. And that is mediocre wine. It makes sense. You can be affectionate about Polwyn and Manischewitz much more than you can be affectionate about some of the greatest vintages that France can come up with. So mediocreness is something that it's a bit subversive, but it's also humanizing. This is true of the shul I grew up in, a reform shul in Radlett, and as you can see, it used to be a church, which is quite common actually in Britain to have deconsecrated churches as synagogues. And my dad was treasurer, in fact, when they pair heavily, so we were there a lot. And the building, before we had we bought the building when the shul, when we could only just about afford it. So it took years for it to be properly to be made nice, and it was actually horrible. It was smelly, it was mildewy. I used to find it a bit icky. I didn't want to touch the door handles when I went to the toilet. But actually, I think of my youth in the shul with great affection, because it was home, and home is mediocre. That's what Hamisha means. It's homely. And when I sometimes go, and this is not knocking American Jewry, but I've been to some amazing synagogue buildings in America, but I'm not sure they feel like home. Whereas I go to most synagogues in Britain have buildings that are utilitarian at best, but they feel like home. Their mediocrity is what makes them communal. A few years ago, and I'm coming nearly to the end, I came up with a way of celebrating the festival of Sukkot that was a little unusual. We had a massive storm over Sukkot. It might have been 6 years ago, something like that, in Britain. And people were posting on Facebook pictures of their blown down sukkahs. So I was co-editing a website called JewThink at the time, and I collated these pictures with permission, and I put in a post celebrating a terrible Sukkot, where people were sitting miserably. As you can see there, that's actually, they were quite young. Those are my nephews in the bottom right-hand corner, sitting in the rain underneath their horrible sukkah. There's something about crap Judaism that is real Judaism, that is human Judaism. Actually work very well. This is what it is to be within a people. For the launch of my book last year, for the launch event almost exactly a year ago, I commissioned for an artist, Tilla Crown. I said, could you put together an exhibition of horrible Judaica? You know, really kitschy sort of stuff, but just celebration of that. But she actually went one better and came up with what she called Judaicants, which is her Museum of Crap Judaica, which was displayed at the Jewish Community Centre for London. And you can see there's a Seder plate that has a space in it for toast and for chocolate eggs. She also designed a waterproof kippah, a little kippah, not one of the big ones that covers the whole head. She designed a Hanukkah that was made entirely out of wax. All this sort of stuff. And this was when the war in Gaza was still going on, and it was a very difficult and dark time. And coming up with something that was celebrating the rubbish aspects of Judaism, the less significant aspects of Judaism, was actually quite therapeutic in many ways. Celebrating the mediocre was something well, for me personally, I can't speak for others, but I think others enjoyed the launch event, was actually something quite necessary and helpful and healing even. So I want to address something here. Will any of this stop anti-Semitism? If we were to emphasize our everydayness, our mundaneness, our boringness, our mediocrity, will any of this stop anti-Semitism? And the answer is no. This is not why I'm making this argument. I'm not suggesting by making ourselves smaller, we will stop being targeted. None of that is what I'm arguing. But what I am saying is that in a world where there is anti-Semitism, we need to keep hold. We can't let ourselves be eaten up entirely by our own significance. That sometimes we have to make space for smallness, for the everyday, for the human scale. So this is my book. It came out a year ago called Everyday Jews, Why the Jewish People Are Not Who You Think They Are, and what the Jewish people are, according to this book, is capable of being mediocre, capable of being everyday, mundane, banal, boring. And that's okay. And that's actually a good thing. And sometimes, maybe not all the time, that needs to be even celebrated. Okay.
Wow. Okay, Keith, you're killing me here because you just broke my heart and built it up again. That was so interesting. I have a million things to say and ask, but I want to open it up first to our participants because it's a little radical. But okay, fine. I'm going to ask one question. Do you think Jews are different than other people in that they think that you don't think, let me say this, do you think that other peoples don't think they're really great? Do you think we're unique in that we're the only people that think that we're really great?
It's not so much thinking that we're really great that's the issue, because actually my argument in the book is we are really great. We're just really great, but in a different set of terms. I don't think it's about greatness. I think it's about significance, that we are at the center of things. We are at the center of the human story. That's what I'm challenging. Now, I do recognize that according to traditional Jewish beliefs, we do have an outside role in the world. And I'm not saying if you believe that you're necessarily wrong. But I do think name Yeshayahu Leibovitz.
Yeshayahu Leibovitz.
Yeshayahu. I mean, I have read his work. I just can't pronounce his first name. Because I think there's a link there. There is a particular way of, if not exactly reconciling what I'm saying with a traditional sense of that, then at least something that's in the same territory. If you believe in a divine that is so transcendent that we cannot comprehend it, that we are not in contact with it, that makes us small. That makes Jews small, doing things because we do those things. So I think it is reconcilable. In fact, in many ways, what I'm challenging here is my own progressive Jewish background and my discomfort with a particular kind of progressive Jewish. It's weird. I often approve of Tikkun Olam style activities. And the sort of things that's done and the sort of politics of it. What I find quite difficult is the framing of it. So there you go.
I thank you. I want to give Ilya a chance to ask his question. Ilya comes to us from Israel.
Hi. So first of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. So it was really fascinating, and I have a short comic remark and a question. So in Israel, we don't have to compromise for a lame, mediocre wine in our Shabbat dinners. Most of the wines are kosher. So we have like boutique wineries that are kosher as well, and they are really tasty. I have some recommendations. Later, Rachel can connect us, and I can recommend it to you when you visit Israel. That's first of all. And I don't think you have to settle in the UK or in the US for mediocre kosher wine as well. I think you can find solutions, but that's just the remark. My question is about the hobby thing, the train spotting. I think it was the hardest part in the lecture for me. I'm not yet willing to give up like the concept that the Jewish people have a calling, what we call in Hebrew Ye'ud, and I don't define it as a privilege, but rather as the like obligations we have. towards ourselves, towards the world, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on
Well,
that.
So, firstly, on the wine, we have great kosher wines in Britain. We think that it's a globalized world and they're available. I'm just not saying that they're chosen for some things, but not for making kiddush over.
Hmm.
And I think there's a
Yeah, I can't
significance
hear
to that.
you.
I think we lost you for a second. We lost you after you think there's significance.
People might drink nice kosher wine with Shabbat dinner, but they don't make kiddush over the nice wine. They make kiddush over the mediocre
He's
one.
getting invited to the wrong dinners, man.
Well, no, I'm saying that there is. I think I'm being invited to the right dinners. I think there's something about that that's meaningful and
It's
interesting.
Hamish. You're saying it's Hamish. It's like it
I'm saying that it's not an accident. It's not because we have bad taste.
traditional.
Right, exactly.
Like the home.
It's a taste of home, and it's not a very nice taste. But on the more on the bigger issue about not being ready to give up that we have some kind of purpose. I'm not sure. I'm slightly faking it till I make it. I mean, it's ingrained in most Jews. It's certainly ingrained in me. That feeling that we need to be there. We need to be at the heart of things, making the world a better place. But one of the reasons I ended up in this place, ended up making this argument, is that I do have this other life, which Rachel mentioned. I've written a lot about metal music, and
Great.
You two should be friends.
I will, but I'm also a sociologist, and so I've done a lot of that was what my PhD was in. That's what a lot of my stuff's doing, and so I've read a lot about other communities and communities that share around the same interests and what they can achieve in the world and what they create in the world. And I think we underestimate them at our peril. I don't think it's not necessary. We shouldn't assume that the groups, the communities that set out to change the world are the only people that are changing the world for the better. Right? That there are all sorts of ways. I mean, train spotting is an extreme example of something that is actually no. Actually, train spotting is a great example because train spotters are also the people, like in Britain, who are campaigning to keep rail lines open. That's
and it's an identity thing. It is
partly identity, but you can. I'm not sure what I would say about stamp collectors, but given that stamps are disappearing from the world, we'll leave them. But I've seen how people who have these obsessions in these small worlds do make the world better for themselves and others, but perhaps through an indirect route. And I don't think we should be ashamed to be related to that kind of sort of group.
I want to mention a question that came up in the chat from Honor Edmonds. Honor writes, "Hi, hopefully I can ask a question to the chat. What aspects of mediocre Jewish life do you think are the most important parts to share with our students? And how do we make them feel enjoyable / appreciated?"
It's a great question. I mean, there's also a contradiction there. What are the most important mediocre things? What I'm trying to validate is starting with the culture that's all around you, because the culture that's taken for granted and not seen, and actually thinking about it and noticing it and saying that there's something about that is ours, even if it's not brilliant, that there are aspects of it. It's about being conscious of the world. It's about why it's so. It's about it's the world is seen through ethnographic eyes, right? I am an ethnographer originally, and that's about noticing. It's about noticing the taken for granted. And I think roots by the Jewish education that you actually to honor those things that people often don't value, to honor the wine that you drink at Kiddush, not because it's brilliant, but because it's ours. So I think that there are educational possibilities in noticing.
I want to add to that a little bit, Keith, if it's okay, because I was just talking to my family about this, because Passover is in 2 weeks. And, there are certain dishes I only use on Passover, and I love them, but they're ridiculous. They're not particularly beautiful, but they have this emotional draw for me. And there are certain recipes, and there are certain smells that I only smell on Passover. And during the year, I wouldn't eat that food because it's not as yummy. But I smell it, and it's home. And there's something there in the mediocrity of that ritual that is so homey. There's something very sacred.
I think so, and I think there is. It's a paradox theologically, isn't it? Because to be holy, to be Kodesh, is to be separate. But it doesn't mean, but separateness doesn't necessarily mean better. It just means different. It means something that you notice rather than something that excels. And there's holiness. There is absolutely holiness in. I mean, you wouldn't go to however much my mum's does the same Passover Pesach baking as she's done for the last however many decades. Would I go into a bakery and buy her macaroons?
I'm not telling her, Keith.
No, they're good. They're good. I wouldn't eat. It's like she makes nice roast chicken. Would I pay for it? Probably not. I'd expect more in a restaurant. But that is absolutely not the point, is it?
I hear that. I want to give Sharon a chance. Sharon, please.
You talked about mediocre, and I think it really is like kind of one of the Jewish goals is to be mediocre, because that means, like, if you look at a bell curve, mediocre is right at the top of the bell curve. And I think as Jews, we're always at one end of that curve or the other. We're always outliers. We're always this small, unique group. Not only that, but, I feel that as Jews, we do best in the outlier section when things are really, like, we're on one side really, really bad, or on the other side really, really good. That's where we come into our space, and we really show, like now in Israel, not such a good time. But, you look at the society, and I think we're doing beautifully as a people. We help each other get to shelters. We really show our best during this difficult time. And when, you talked about Nobel Prizes, that's the other half of our bell curve. So, I think we do best on outlying, but I can see why we always want to be the mediocre, with everybody else.
Well, there's a tension in baked into the heart of Zionism. And it always was, and it still is, which was the Zionist tendency to be just like everybody else. We'll be in our state, so will Portugal, and we'll just be normalized. And then there's the opposite tendency that in a state we can bring Jewish culture, Jewish life into the state of advancement. And I think Israel itself pinballs between both feelings, and is sometimes a little bit confused. In the chapter on Israel in my book, I discuss Israel by talking about Gimel Yafit. Gimel Yafit was the queen of Israeli advertising, who did these terrible adverts. She basically hired herself out to any company that wanted to pay her money, and she appeared in all her adverts. And I was fascinated by it when I was in Israel, and I'm fascinated by, she's dead now, looking at her YouTube videos. But I was thinking, this is an Israel that, when Israel does Hasbara, doesn't talk about things like Gimel Yafit, because she was awful, right? Really poor quality. But it's also not the Israel that anti-Zionists talk about why Israel is terrible. And it's completely outside that discourse. and that is what made it interesting. You know, that there is that Israel, but I think part of the time Israelis embrace that, and part of the time they flee from it, because it takes quite a lot to accept normality, particularly when we're not treated as normal.
I had this theory right after October 7th that helped me sleep at night that is probably really messed up. That one of the reasons that I appreciated that the world was still holding us accountable to a higher standard than any other country was because they held us. They believed that we should be held to a higher standard. And I appreciated that as a religious Zionist because I want to be thought of as someone who holds herself to a higher standard. And I hear you saying this, and it's the truth is that there's this yearning that I hear from so many Jews and Israelis in the world who are saying, can you just give us the same standard as everybody else? Don't give me this higher standard. And a little bit I hear that in your words, and
but there is that coexists often in the same sentence with a sense of with the reverse.
Mm-hmm.
I think that ambivalence about what we want it goes very deep in Israel, but I think it goes deep in the Jewish people as a whole. Well, that we want to be left alone. We also want to be at the heart of things. I suppose my feeling is there's probably an ideal balance of the two tendencies, but in the last few years, we haven't been able to maintain that balance for very understandable reasons. But I think sometimes we get a bit addicted to it as well.
Yeah.
And there was I talk about Northern Ireland in the book, how there was a time I suddenly realized was writing the book. There was a time when I knew all the Northern Irish politicians. They were in the White House. They were on the British news. All these, it's a territory of 1.5 million people with loads of political parties, all of whom I knew, and all of the leaders who knew. And then I suddenly realized, I don't know who leads any of these parties anymore, because there's a piece, it's an imperfect piece, right? And they basically, Northern Ireland, it hasn't gone away, but it's become obscure. And what was extraordinary about there is that the protagonists in that conflict decided to accept being not very important political parties in one very small patch of territory. I think that we have a very, very long way to go before that happens in the Middle East, where anybody from whatever side is prepared to, it can even envisage what it would be like to say, hey, I've forgotten, I don't know who's in power, who's the Israeli prime minister? Who's the Iranian prime minister? Who are these, I never heard anything about Syria in the last, we're so far away, and you can argue about who's responsible, but that is part of what's so terrible about the predicament of today. Is that
first of all, thank you for this incredibly thought-provoking webinar. So interesting, so much to unpack and discuss. Friends, I encourage you to get Keith's book and to reach out to him and for more fascinating conversation. Keith, thank you for making time to talk to us from the hotel room in Berlin. Thank you for your interesting and thoughtful work. I can't wait for you to come visit us at the museum at ANU. And thank you all so much. I want to wish everyone a meaningful Passover. Hopefully, may we share news of peace and mediocrity.
It's a boring Pesach.
Amen. Amen. Thank you all so much.